numbers and trends we've shared with the committee before, but a majority of applicants would prefer to test 100% remotely on a future bar exam. And that is a preference that we have seen over several years of surveys. And it is a preference that we believe will be meeting with our new model. With this year's survey, we also asked for applicants, respondents to the survey to list some of their concerns related to remote exam. And I just want to list them because I think this committee has discussed some of these already, and in some ways we are responding to them. So the top categories include organizing notes and resources in a digital environment, finding a distraction-free environment, familiarity with the remote exam platform or process, and stable internet. And while I think all of these topics are important and we'll be considering them in our work, I just want to note that several are already being addressed. So with regard to organizing notes and resources in a digital environment, we're continuing to discuss with Measure Learning the best design of the exam software's layout and like the available features so as to best provide an exam experience that applicants expect. And with regard to familiarity to the remote exam platform or process, we believe that the California bar exam experiment is one important opportunity for applicants to expose themselves to the platform. But also, we will continue to require mandatory practice exams and other features that we've included in previous exams to make sure that applicants have an opportunity to test some of these features. So these concerns, I think, are still important to us, and we'll continue to explore them further. But I wanted to note that what the survey respondents have told us is important to them are already areas that the committee has raised and that staff are continuing to explore. So I want to leave the committee with just a few takeaways across both of these surveys. As I mentioned, there is increased overall satisfaction in both surveys. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we continue to survey our applicants. We take this feedback seriously, and we continue to make necessary changes. As I mentioned at the top as well, I think it's important for the committee to reflect on its recent policy decisions and to assess their impact. And I think the first year law students exam survey shows that the committee's action to move towards a multiple choice only exam was positively received and had a positive impact for most test takers. Again, I'll highlight that the live remote proctoring that was included in the first year exam and will be the type of proctoring for future bar exams appears to make applicants more comfortable and again leads to possibly a more positive experience. And I'll underline again that the traditional in-person exams are costly and burdensome for applicants. And last, as we continue to move forward into this future where we're relying more on technology, recognizing that technology issues impact only a small number of applicants should hopefully reassure us as we continue to move forward. Okay, so I know that was a lot, but we have a lot on the agenda, and it's I wanted to get through that as quickly as possible. So we wanted to bring this information to the committee, and I'm happy to take any questions from members.
No question? SF office, LA office. I think you guys are muted in case someone is talking over there. Do we know? Here we go. Oh, nope, you muted again. Yeah, Devin, see if you're able to unmute them.
We're muted by choice.
SF office is also muted.
We've given up.
Just when I thought Cody had a really good, amazing presentation. I'm guessing we're gonna have some questions around this for Cody. Brody, you got a question?
We're questioned out, Brody.
Oh boy. Okay. About SF office?
Nope. We're good.
Okay. Oh, that's easy enough. I don't think there's anything that needs to be voted on. So unless there are any questions or further discussions, we are going to move on to the next agenda item, which is 4.6. 4.6 is the discussion on data related to handwriting option for applicants without testing accommodations. Well, Cody, back to you again, as well as Vincent.
I'm back. Yes. And I should note this presentation is much shorter. We only have a few charts to share. So for anyone who's tired of looking at visuals, we'll be done here in a second. But today's discussion around the handwriting option is part of the committee's work plan. There is an item on our work plan to explore whether or not handwriting for standard test takers, those test takers without approved testing accommodations, should continue or not. I want to be clear as we dive into this discussion. We are only talking about whether or not handwriting should be allowed as an option as preference for standard test takers. There is no discussion to remove handwriting for those with testing accommodations. So I just want to start there. And again, there's no recommendation or decision to be made today. What we would like to do is present to the committee some new data about who these test takers are, start an initial discussion, present some possible next steps, and gather feedback from the committee that can inform our work. And then we will come to the committee at a later time with a recommended course of action. So let me share my screen. I'm going to go over a quick background, and then I'm going to introduce a member of our team who will talk a little bit about the data. Okay. So just for background, for those that maybe need a quick primer or a foundation for this discussion, right now, applicants who are standard test takers, again, those without a testing accommodation, can choose to handwrite the California bar exam without a testing accommodation due to their own preference. Right, the last exam that we analyzed was February 2024, and we found that only 8% of applicants actually selected that handwriting option. And we're going to show you some more totals year over year in just a moment. But I think some interesting background for this discussion would be to cover the trend in this area amongst other other high stakes exams and licensing entities. So the NCBE's next gen bar exam will be a computer-based exam, and that, as we all know, begins in 2026. I believe the NCBE's belief in that decision is that use of a computer is part of being a competent attorney, and so they believe that the test takers who sit for that exam should be familiar enough with using a computer to respond to the questions. But they're not the only one. We've seen in the testing space, SAT, LSAT, GRE, and GMAT are all fully computerized. And many of these have been computer-based exams for a half decade. We also see amongst the high-stakes licensing exams a trend towards computer-based delivery. So those licensing exams related to the medical field, accounting, and even spaces like engineering and architecture, where you might think there's kind of an inherent need for pen and paper, have all been able to move towards computer-based exams and expect that their test takers use a computer to respond to exam questions. I should note, again, just to continue to underline it, I believe all of these exams offer handwriting as a testing accommodation for those that need it. We're again talking about a preference for standard test takers. So that's a quick background. I want to introduce Vincent Lieu. Vincent is a program analyst in the Office of Admissions. He is the individual who's responsible for producing a lot of the data analysis and visualizations that we are going to look at today. And he's going to walk us through a few charts that can help the committee understand who is this handwriting population, so we can better understand how a choice in the future might impact them. Vincent, are you
I'm ready.
Perfect. Go for
Yeah,
it.
thank you, Cody. So next I'll be talking is about the overall trends. So this graph, it depicts the number of TA and non-TA writers we had for each of the bar exam administration. Here we can see some major insights. One was the initial decline in handwriters. The numbers of handwriters peaked to 551 in February 2020, but dropped sharply to 88 by February 2021. This decline is due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which shifted many test takers to use laptops instead of handwriting exams due to the remote testing conditions. Two was a gradual recovery post 2021. After February 2021, we see that the numbers of handwriters begin to recover, with a steady increase reaching to 217 by February 2022. This suggests a shift back to in-person exams and increasing preference for handwriting as conditions begin to normalize. Three, from July 2022 to onwards, the numbers of handwriters begin to fluctuate slightly, with numbers ranging from 351 and 370. The February 2024 count stands at 330, and to clarify, the 330, less than 5% has a testing accommodation. This is suggesting a stabilization in handwriting. And in summary, despite the recovery after the pandemic, there's a slight downward trend overall when observing the dotted trend line, and the new stabilized counts are now lower than the pre-pandemic values. This indicates a gradual decline in handwriters over time, and this could be due to the increasing preference for remote testing. Next slide. Next, I'll be talking about the passage rate for laptop writers. Here, when we compare the passage rate between laptop and handwriters by each exam administration, we could see some major trends. Laptop test takers, they consistently perform better than handwriters, with their passage rate exceeding 50% after July of 2020. Next, we also see that handwriters had a much lower passage rate, especially in 2021, when it dropped to just 4%. And though it has recovered somewhat, it has remained lower compared to the laptop users. Next slide. Next, I'll be talking about is the age group. This graph indicates a notable trends in preference for handwriting versus laptop usage among different age groups from July 2019 to February 2024. And these are some of the key major insights. The largest segments of handwriters versus laptop usage among different age groups are ages 40 to 49. They make up 27% of the total handwriting population. And we can also see that young adults, they lean towards laptop. Laptop usage remained the highest, with a younger demographic peaking at 53% in the age group of 30 to 39. This is showing a trend towards digital formats among the younger groups. And in summary, as the age increases, the preference for handwriting exceeds laptops. The laptop population is comprised of more of a younger test takers group compared to the handwriting population. 43% of the handwriting population is over the age of 50 compared to just 12% of the laptop population. Next slide. Next, we will analyze the demographic data on the country of birth. This graph, it represents applicants born in countries other than the US, regardless of whether they pursued their legal studies domestically or abroad. Here we can see that most of the applicants who requested handwriting were born outside of the US at 61% versus at 39%. Next, I'll pass it on to Cody.
Okay, thank you so much, Vincent. So we thought it was really important to kind of create an avatar of who these test takers are, because it does give us a sense of how to proceed. And I'm going to summarize some takeaways in just a moment. But before I do that, I want to lay out some considerations for the committee as we think about maybe some possible actions in the future. From the state bar's perspective, there are some financial considerations regarding whether or not we should continue to allow handwriting as an option just due to preference. Right now, under our current testing, well, the traditional testing administration model, the difference between a handwriter and a laptop test taker is only about 2%. Under the new approach, where we will have remote test taking and in-person test center test takers, handwriters would be required to test in a test center. The cost for the state bar, actually, the difference between the cost of those two options, remote and in a test center, is much larger. Looking at the total number of handwriters that choose to handwrite the exam just out of preference, that would mean up to, at most, $200,000 in additional costs per exam administration. There's also a lot of operational challenges that I want to raise here. We talked about earlier today having some of the challenges of having many test centers. In this instance, delivering exam materials, hard copy exam materials, to many more locations under our new model poses an exam security risk. Also, I mentioned in our previous discussion that we really are looking at the test centers as a really valuable opportunity for those who don't have access to internet or a computer or otherwise have a need for the test center. Allowing those who choose handwriting just due to preference would add, an increased burden on that limited test center capacity. There's also just additional time and expenses related to grading, receiving, and handling these handwritten responses. So we have to scan them in. It takes more time to read these essays. We have to do secure shipping throughout the process. That adds additional logistic challenges and costs. So it's just more operationally challenging. And there is an impact on applicants. We've talked about the cost to travel to a test center. If handwriters continue to choose this as a preference and are required to take the test in person, they will certainly incur those additional costs related to testing in person, and there is just will not be an alternative for those test takers other than to test remotely. So the takeaways, just to summarize, and then I'm going to introduce a few options I would love for the committee to consider, or at least discuss today. Total handwriters remains lower than pre-pandemic levels. Handwriting is almost entirely chosen due to test taker preference. We talked about how there was 330 test takers that were handwriters, and only 4% were actually those with testing accommodation. So that population is almost entirely preference. But the handwriters are older. They're more likely to be born outside the US, and they're also less likely to pass the bar exam, which may or may not be directly tied to the fact that they're handwriters, but also you can assume there's also some intersectional impacts between being older or being foreign born that may impact your ability or your likelihood to pass the exam. And so considering all of that as a comprehensive picture is important. As we lean towards February 2025, we're continuing to identify some operational challenges in the work that we do, and certainly handwriting poses some challenges both financially and operationally under our new administration approach. So today, the committee is not asked to take action, but instead we would love to hear from the committee and discuss some possible paths forward. And I want to note, we are not recommending a path forward. We've introduced on this slide maybe several options that can be discussed, but these are just for discussion purposes. So just to go through them, we can maintain the status quo. Doing so is at odds with some of the trends that we identified in the high stakes examination space and licensing space. There are some of those additional exam expenses that we noted and those operational challenges. Option 2, we could sunset handwriting. We could identify a date in the future in which we end handwriting as an option for non-TA applicants. We could peg that to July 2026, which would be in alignment with the next gen bar exam beginning, or choose another date. And doing so again would incur those costs that could be up to $200,000 per exam. If we chose the July 2026 exam, that would be 3 more administrations and a total of $600,000. Option 3 would be grandfathering handwriters. So we could end handwriting for non-TA applicants beginning with a date, but those who are already applicants that have tested using the handwriting option would be allowed to do so into the future. A fourth option could be a combination of the two. We sunset the handwriting option further into the future, and we also adopt some sort of grandfather mechanism beyond that date as well. And perhaps there's an option 5 that the committee would like to raise as well, but these are a few options that we feel make a lot of sense. So I will end this presentation there and happy to take questions or kick off a discussion amongst committee members about this topic and possible paths forward.
Thanks, Cody. Go ahead.
Somebody
Paul.
remind me of the requirement that we give a certain period of 3 years is sticking in the back of my mind of notice to law schools when we change the bar exam, and would eliminating handwriting be the kind of change that would trigger that?
It says a 2-year notice when something significantly changes the way someone trains and prepares for the exam.
So, Gene, have you thought about that? Is that triggered by this? By eliminating handwriting as an option?
You know, that question specifically hasn't come to OGC, but I think that it's certainly something we can give more thought to. But as Audrey said, I think that you know, the relevant statute here, I think contemplates more the type of preparation that you need to do substantively. Though we could look a little more closely at that, Paul. Thank you for raising it.
Sure.
And one of my concerns is, you know, obviously we're going virtual, and for those applicants who may be taking the bar exam outside of the United States or even outside of California, for those handwriters, how do we receive their papers? Will they be FedEx to us from, let's say, abroad? Will they be sent to us through fax or some other means? Do we know? Or at least.
We'd have to do
Well,
secure shipping of materials the way we ship things back now, right, to the NCB.
yeah,
And
and that
one also-
always. Mhm,
Oh,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I also just wanted to be clear. I think under our design for the future exam, we would be securely shipping it to test centers only, though. We're not exploring like shipment to individuals' homes or something like that. I just want to make sure that that was clear.
So if you're taking it remotely, you'll be shipping those papers directly to the nearby test center and not the applicant's home?
If you needed a hard copy of the exam, then you would need to test in a test center.
Got it.
And regardless of where that test center is located.
Got it. Okay,
Chair, I have a question. Thank you.
please.
Thanks, Cody and Vincent, for the presentation. I have 2 questions. One is about the chart with the age groups that was splitting up, you know, who's a laptop taker and who's a handwriter. I'm wondering, it seems to me, looking at that obviously, because the handwriters tend to skew older in age, right? And if the trends are that people are going more digital, then it seems that over the next couple of decades, most people will probably just be taking the test digitally, and there'll just be less people, period, that even want to handwrite, because obviously it's a different generation that's being brought up in a different time. And so it makes me think that this might end up just being a non-issue in a decade and a half or so, because just culturally people won't want to handwrite. And so I'm wondering if you guys have any evidence like to the contrary of that, or if you have any thoughts about, you know, where the trends might be in 20 years.
Yeah, that is a good point. So I think, Bethany, I think what you're suggesting is perhaps this group that's 30 to 39-year-olds in 10 to 20 years will have shifted over to this group, and now we would now have an older population that actually prefers the laptop option.
Correct. Yeah.
And it wouldn't be an issue. I think we can assume that that would be the case. As far as forecasting that, I think it is a bit of a challenge at this point, because we have this new line beginning in July 2022 that is somewhat stabilized. So looking at the data here, there's not a strong trend line, but if we ran this chart back to July 2000, right, you'd probably see a much starker drop off, because we've already had most test takers transition from handwriting to laptop, and then you would see a steeper decline, and maybe you could forecast that this issue would resolve itself much sooner. But looking at just our most recent data, it's somewhat stabilized. So it's hard to say what that timeline looks like. If that's my belief, at least.
Okay.
And-
One other question then. So I think it's the slide before this one. You were talking about the costs of the difference between the handwriters and the laptops. And so there was a figure that, here we go, that the cost is 600% higher. That seems like a wild figure. And so I need to know, like, what exactly are these costs? Like, how would the cost be 600% higher than the laptop takers?
So under the current model, like our traditional exam, the difference between a standard test taker doing a laptop and a standard test taker who is using a hard copy is small because the rest of the experience is so similar, right? So they're in the same test center and they've got the same proctor experience. The difference between remote test taking and in-person test taking at a test center model, that difference is much larger because the experience is so different. So the remote test taking experience is relatively cheaper compared to the test center model where an applicant goes in person. I should also note the 600% also, this includes the possibility that test takers who are handwriters aren't in some of these pop-up test centers that we've discussed. Those are even more costly than the other previously contracted test centers. So, but just to summarize, it's just that this new model that remote is just far more affordable than the test center experience. And under the traditional model, the only difference really is the hard copy materials, but the rest of the proctoring and testing experience looks the same.
Okay, awesome. Look, before I let you go, last comment. I really appreciate this. I know we're not voting on anything today, but it's super nice to like have a presentation in advance. So now we can kind of like think about it. And then I know we're going to talk about it later. So thanks for coming to us early with the information.
Yeah, and thank you for recognizing that, because that is our hope, is that we could start conversations here that then lead to action later on. So I appreciate that.
Mr. Lawrence?
Thanks. A quick question. Does the sunset option, when you're looking at expenses or costs, does that factor in any technical problems, additional technical problems, the sort of the costs?
Are you thinking like the costs that arise if we have more handwriters take the test remotely and then there's technical issues that need to be resolved? It doesn't. I guess partly due to the fact that those are unknowns at this point. I guess this is me just going in a different direction, but looking at our previous data from the last presentation and how few individuals have technology issues, it may or may not be an issue that really presents additional costs that are meaningful.
Great, thank you.
Hi, this is Robbie. I don't know if I did the hand raising thing right. Gosh, I'm the worst today, but I want to piggyback on what Bethany said, that, you know, I think this problem is going to, or this, I don't want to say problem because it's not a problem. If somebody wants to write the bar exam, let them write the bar exam. I think this issue is going to resolve itself exactly as Bethany said, as the population that takes the bar is more comfortable with doing so electronically. So, you know, my feeling would be option one, which is maintain the status quo and let these handwriters slowly stop taking the bar or passing the bar. Vincent, I'm not really sure what the point was to talk about the nationality of handwriters, and the fact is that they are more likely not to pass. I'm not sure what the point of those things is. That may be true, but I feel like if someone wants to write the bar exam, that's how they're more comfortable. They're an older applicant who's nervous about technology, then we need to accommodate them. And if we have to treat that in our minds as a TA accommodation, then that's what it would be. Audrey, can I ask you real quick if when we're using remote centers, is the bar going to be charged per seat at that center or just for the use of the center itself? How does that work?
Either modality is per taker, right? So there's a price point for every remote taker, a price point for everyone in their vendor-owned test center. And then the highest price point is what Cody was just talking about, which is if the vendor has to create pop-up centers, basically having a state bar only site in LA or San Francisco hosted just for the exam. That's the most expensive iteration, and that has a different per taker price point.
So if we're talking about having to go to a test center to handwrite the bar exam, isn't that the same as the accommodated applicants? The same cost there, not the 600%, just the regular, what the bar pays for an accommodated applicant who chooses to write at a test center. Is there any difference?
Well, it depends on the accommodations, but there could be folks who, accommodation or preference wise, go to take the exam in a center, but they're still using a computer. So when you have someone who has to handwrite, obviously they're not going to get the exam delivered in the computer. So we have the extra costs about the paper materials and the shipping of those materials securely around.
And, you know, I go to the Pasadena site for every bar. I see the room with the handwriters, about 100 in the summer, Audrey, I think, or Amy, you probably know, much less so in February. You know, I think I think the bar should offer that to those who wish to handwrite the bar. And just as Bethany said, that number is going to go down until, you know, it's probably very close to zero. So I guess that's my thought on it.
And if I could just address your first point, because I think it's important. I think maybe out of desire to be short, we maybe stepped over it quickly. But the purpose, I think, of identifying the origin, the country of origin of these test takers, is to give us a starting point to kind of hypothesize why they would prefer this handwriting modality. And we don't ask why they select it, but looking at the large that the majority of them are born out of the country, you can make some speculations, right? So it could be lack of access to technology wherever they're from. Could be, you know, cultural preference, regarding how their kind of learning experience is growing up or even at university. So I think we wanted to look at their background to better understand why they're choosing this as a preference. We can't say for certain, but I think it gives us a starting point to think about why that might be the case. And we didn't make that clear enough. So I just want to be clear that we didn't look at country of origin just arbitrarily. We thought it told us something about these applicants' experience and why they're choosing that preference.
Thanks, Cody. And my position is, you know, I'm a strong advocate when it comes to access, and this does not affect the, you know, those who need or have special accommodation needs for handwriting. So this will not impact these individuals, and that really gives me that peace of mind. On the other hand, Brody, I think the concern, I'm just trying to, you know, think about the issues here. It feels like the state bar, you know, wants to sunset it in a way to help save money. But obviously it, you know, when you only have a couple of applicants, you know, even if a handful, that could still create a lot of issues, financial, otherwise. And so, and I think, you know, the state bar is now coming to us and say, hey, let's think of, you know, ways in which to perhaps either sunset it or ways to have the state bar minimize any additional financial burden, just because a small or minority population, you know, prefer handwriting over computer, I think. And by the way, there are applicants who don't need special accommodation, who don't need testing accommodation, would still prefer to use handwriting. And I think it is those individuals who really don't have, you know, a strong preference over one another that, you know, where we want to sunset those individuals. But again, today is not the day to choose one or the other. It's just a matter of discussion. So I'm just excited, just like what Ms. Peak said. I mean, this is a good time to just think about the issues, just so that when the time comes, we'll be ready to make a decision.
It's the case that it costs more to take the exam on a computer, correct?
Cody, do you know the answer?
Currently?
There's a laptop fee.
Oh, yes, there's a laptop fee. Yes.
So we have right now we have a perverse situation where, or going forward, it's going to cost us a lot more for somebody to handwrite the exam, and yet it costs them more to take it on computer. Maybe if nothing else, we adjust the pricing. Maybe some people are going to handwriting because it's cheaper. And maybe we should eliminate that incentive and just try to have one price for the exam, and might get a few more people taking it on the computer.
But how would that work for those who need special accommodation? You'll be hiking up their prices as well.
Well, we can't spread the ADA costs over all the other.
Right.
costs. But
Exactly.
I think we could do this, maybe. Or maybe we should be, if you do as I sometimes say, you charge the actual cost of providing the exam to people, the cost of the service, maybe handwriting should be more expensive.
Provided you don't need testing accommodation.
Right, just for regular test takers.
Preference only.
Right.
That could be one of the options considered. Code.
Right.
Let's incentivize according to our costs. That's
Yeah,
basically.
so Cody, that's another option for you to consider based on costs.
I appreciate that. I do want to note, because I think we've had a lot of discussions lately where we've raised our financial considerations. I do think that is one, but I don't want to undermine the operational considerations either. The risk of exam security issues, shipping hard copy materials, it is a real one. So I think we'll consider this feedback on the financial considerations, but I think we'll also still be very much considering those operational challenges because they are real.
Yeah, your comments are well taken. I have the same concern as well, Cody. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Unless we have further discussions, let's move on to 4.7, which Audrey, I believe we're skipping. Right? We are skipping item 4.7, and we're going to cover that in the second open session. So item 4.8, which is moral character rehabilitation presentation by no one other than Mr. Lane.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. I am David Lane. I'm the attorney for the Moral Character Unit at the State Bar of California. And today I am going to talk to you about the role that rehabilitation plays in the moral character process when we're making a moral character determination. I'll talk about what it means in this specific context. It's a term of art, and why it's an integral part of the process, and how we assess it. I think that any discussion about the moral character process should start with the definition of good moral character. It's defined in the rules of the State Bar of California, Rule 4.40. And it's easy to look at in sort of four categories that I have bullet pointed here. Good moral character includes, but is not limited to, qualities of honesty, fairness, candor, trustworthiness, all sort of at least related terms. Observance of fiduciary responsibility, which can encompass financial responsibility. Respect for and obedience to the law, and respect for the rights of others and the judicial process. So this definition is not just some sort of nebulous colloquial idea about what good moral character is. It's very specific to the legal profession. These are the qualities that an ethical attorney must possess to practice ethically. That's why this definition is relevant in the specific context of getting a law license. And this is important too. So conceptually, you know, we talk to a lot of applicants, a lot of law students about the moral character process. And I think that some people believe that the process consists of the applicant disclosing issues, often misconduct that they engaged in their past. And then that misconduct is assessed. And if it's sufficiently severe, they are punished by receiving an adverse moral character determination and they can't get a law license. That is not how the process works. It's really important conceptually to remember that what we care about is not who somebody was in the past. Ultimately, it's who they are now. It is the applicant's burden to show that they have the requisite moral character to practice law currently. We look at things that occurred in their past because they may inform who they are now, but ultimately what we care about is their current moral character. And that is why the concept of rehabilitation is so important. If all you know about an applicant is misconduct they've engaged in their past, you can't possibly assess the likelihood of them receiving a positive moral character determination. You're missing a crucial variable. You have to know what has happened since the misconduct, what the evidence of rehabilitation is. You know, I often say that some of the most impressive applicants that we see who submit moral character applications have the most serious misconduct in their past. So if that's all you were looking at, you wouldn't have any idea that, for example, maybe they had a bad drug addiction in the past. Maybe that drug addiction was related to criminal behavior that they engaged in to support the addiction. Now they've scratched and clawed their way out of that addiction. You know, now they sponsor people at AA or Narcotics Anonymous or other groups. Maybe they've started a nonprofit where they go and they talk to kids about avoiding the problems that were related to the reason they engaged in misconduct. Again, these are some of the most impressive applicants that we see, even though they have the most serious misconduct in their past. You cannot assess moral character without considering rehabilitation. And this is directly related to the fact that in California, there is no act of misconduct that automatically disqualifies you from receiving a positive moral character determination. The caveat is given sufficient rehabilitation. In theory, any applicant who has engaged in any misconduct in their past can theoretically engage in enough rehabilitation to demonstrate that they should be licensed at this point. These bullet points, this is language that comes directly from California Supreme Court cases about moral character. The court wants to see evidence that the applicant is no longer the same person they were when they engaged in misconduct. They want to see a compelling showing of reform. These are sort of metaphorical, broad concepts, but I think they get to the gist of the idea. What we are looking for is a profound change in the person that's occurred since they engaged in misconduct that's compelling enough to suggest that they're no longer going to engage in the misconduct anymore. Proportionality is important here. What I mean by that is the more serious the misconduct, the stronger the showing of rehabilitation. This is sort of intuitive, right? If somebody has a couple of shoplifting convictions a few years ago, they're not going to have to show as strong and compelling a rehabilitation case as would somebody who committed homicide last year. Pretty intuitive. This all comes from Supreme Court law. I want to talk just for a minute about the procedurally how moral character determinations work, because this can inform how we make our decisions at the state bar and committee of bar examiners levels. So what we're looking at here is essentially the appeals process. At the bottom left there is state bar staff. That's me and others. We make the initial determination after the applicant submits their moral character application. We conduct an appropriate investigation if it's necessary, further inquiry, gather information from the applicant and others, and we make that initial determination. If we issue an adverse determination, the applicant can ask the committee of bar examiners to conduct an administrative review. The committee's review is brand new. It's de novo. They don't have to defer to us whatsoever. That is state bar staff's determination. In fact, the applicant at that point can submit additional information to the committee that staff didn't even have the benefit of seeing. The committee makes an entirely new determination. If the committee issues an adverse determination, the applicant can appeal it through state bar court. The trial level, the appellate level, called the hearing department, and the review department in state bar court. And what happens in state bar court is it becomes a formal proceeding. It was informal when the state bar staff and the committee made their determinations. Now that we're in court, it becomes formal. On one side, you have the applicant and possibly applicant's counsel arguing, trying to meet the burden of showing that the applicant has good moral character. On the other side, you have the Office of Chief Trial Counsel of the State Bar arguing the opposing view. Whichever side gets an adverse decision in State Bar Court ultimately can petition the California Supreme Court for review. The last serious moral character case that the court decided was in 2014, the Stephen Glass case. So that doesn't happen often, but it is available. So once the process does become formal, once the applicant asks for and is granted a formal hearing in state bar court, procedurally, it's a three-phase process. Initially, it's the applicant's burden to establish a prima facie case of good moral character. What does that mean? Prima facie means on its face, roughly speaking. This is a very low burden of proof. Essentially, the applicant presents facts that, if they are assumed to be true, would lead to the conclusion that they have good moral character. This is not a hard burden to overcome, but they have to show it initially. If they succeed there, the burden shifts over to the state bar. Now the state bar has the burden to rebut applicant's prima facie showing with clear and convincing evidence of bad moral character. I'm not going to get bogged down in what the clear and convincing standard means. We don't have time today. Suffice to say, it's somewhere above the preponderance of the evidence standard that's used in civil court and below beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal court. If the state bar successfully rebuts the applicant's prima facie showing, the burden shifts back to the applicant. Now the applicant has the burden to present clear and convincing evidence of rehabilitation. And that's how the decisions are made in state bar court. That's how the Supreme Court would consider what the proceedings that went on in state bar court, were it making a decision on an application. And while this process doesn't explicitly take place when state bar staff makes a determination or the committee makes a determination, understanding what happens in court is instructive to how we sort of view the process and make a determination. So I think it's valuable to understand that. Okay, so I talked about proportionality and the fact that the more serious misconduct is, the greater the showing of rehabilitation there has to be by the applicant. That means that you have to assess the misconduct, right? You have to know how serious it is, so you can then conclude what the rehabilitation standard is. These are some of the fundamental factors that we look at when we're looking at an act of misconduct, whether it's a criminal act or a non-criminal act that somehow shows potentially that the applicant is not going to meet their burden of showing good moral character. Again, some of this is intuitive. What was the applicant's role? If it was a conspiracy or something of that nature, what was their role there? Was it an isolated event, or did they engage in a pattern of misconduct? How serious was the misconduct? How serious was the harm to any potential victims or the community? Has the applicant paid restitution, which could either be court ordered or not? Sometimes an applicant could engage in some sort of fraudulent activity. It never becomes a criminal matter, but have they tried to make amends to pay back the victims who were on the receiving end of fraud, for example? The first bullet point there. So when, again, this all comes from the California Supreme Court. When we're looking at the web of facts that make up any, act of misconduct, Generally, what we do is we give the applicant the benefit of the doubt. If there is a set of facts that could lead to two conclusions and one is more favorable for the applicant, we're going to lean toward that conclusion. It becomes less the case if there's compelling evidence of serious misconduct. So, for example, if an applicant recently engaged in fraudulent or dishonest behavior and we have good evidence that that actually happened, we're less likely to give them the benefit of the doubt when we're assessing the facts surrounding the misconduct. So those are some of the main factors we look at. Okay, so back to rehabilitation. Now that we've thought about how serious the misconduct was, we have to think about the rehabilitation. You can really look at rehabilitation, broadly speaking, as involving two elements. The first is time. There has to be a sufficient period of time that goes by after the applicant engaged in the misconduct, during which they don't engage in any further misconduct, right? Makes sense. And that period of time is referred to as the rehabilitation period. And then good conduct, rehabilitative acts. What did they do during the rehabilitation period? Those two things added together show you what the rehabilitation showing is. So beginning with the time, the court has said that the rehabilitation period starts when the misconduct ends and the consequences end. What do the consequences ending mean? Well, I have a quote from Justice Corrigan here. This was actually during the oral argument in the Stephen Glass case. She said, they say character is what you do when no one is looking. So what she's referring to there is, let's say you engaged in criminal acts, you served a prison sentence, now you're on probation, parole, some sort of community supervision. That period of time isn't given a lot of weight as far as calculating the rehabilitation period, because you're under the scrutiny of the legal system, the court, the probation office at the time. So you have some duress, you have an incentive to act good and properly, other than just doing so because you've been rehabilitated. By the same token, the rehabilitation period ends when you submit your moral character application. This doesn't mean that you can submit your application and then engage in misconduct and it doesn't matter. Quite the contrary. Once you've submitted your application, the reason the rehabilitation period ends is because now you're under the scrutiny of the state bar. Now we're watching closely. And so just as if you were on probation, once you've submitted your application, you have an incentive to not engage in misconduct other than just true rehabilitation. So that's how the period of time is calculated. Misconduct involving moral turpitude generally requires a stronger showing of rehabilitation. That includes a substantial rehabilitation period, is the language the court has used. What is moral turpitude? It's another term that has different meanings in different contexts. And specifically in this context, it refers to misconduct that involves some sort of violation of the qualities that made up the definition of good moral character that I showed you earlier. Any kind of dishonesty, a breach of fiduciary duty, those are acts of misconduct that involve moral turpitude, and it's going to require more time to recover from those in terms of rehabilitation. The other part of the equation, the rehabilitative act. So again, if the misconduct involved moral turpitude, the court wants to see exemplary conduct during the rehabilitation period, not just ordinary conduct. What is ordinary conduct? Holding a job, not violating the law, starting a family, attending church. You know, these are things that might bolster a showing of rehabilitation. They may show that you've gotten a handle on some things in life, and you're more likely to be rehabilitated, but they're not enough to prove rehabilitation ultimately if you've engaged in serious misconduct. Similarly, remorse, character witnesses, both great, both perhaps necessary often, but not sufficient ultimately to show rehabilitation from serious misconduct. We want to see that you have remorse. We often talk about the concept of insight, the idea of understanding that what you did was wrong, acknowledging that you did it, perhaps even feeling bad about it. This is all sort of encompassed in remorse, insight, and again, that's often necessary. It's a necessary part of your rehabilitation, but it may not be sufficient. When we talk about exemplary conduct, what we're looking for example, significant involvement in community service, something that benefits the community that perhaps you harmed when you engaged in misconduct. Maybe you have engaged in educational activities that are related to the misconduct. You could take continuing legal education courses that are related to whatever the misconduct was that you engaged in. You could go to anger management if the misconduct, if there was some sort of anger issue involved. You could take the State Bar's ethics school or client trust accounting school, both day-long schools taught by State Bar attorneys. Those are the sort of things, you're making an affirmative attempt to educate yourself about the problem that got you in trouble in the first place. It's important to note here, because there's another misunderstanding, I think, sometimes among some applicants, that mental health issues or other medical problems could be somehow relevant to the moral character process. Per se, on their own, they're just not. For example, we see a lot of applicants who have engaged in significant misconduct that was related to an alcohol use disorder or some other drug use disorder. The fact that somebody has an alcohol use disorder by itself is simply not relevant. It does not reflect poorly on their moral character. If they had a string of DUIs, public intoxication, other acts of misconduct in the world that had practical consequences outside of themselves, then that are inextricably linked perhaps to a drinking problem, then showing that they have addressed that problem can bolster a showing of rehabilitation. Again, it's not the medical issue that's relevant. It's showing that you're not going to engage in actual misconduct that is relevant in the process. Okay. That was a very brief but hopefully informative overview of what rehabilitation means in this context, how it gets plugged into the equation when we make moral character determinations, how it's assessed, why it is such a crucial concept here. And now I know you want examples, because I would if somebody told me about this stuff in the abstract, and I'm going to give them to you. But before I do, let me just say, examples in the moral character context are at best incomplete. Every moral character determination turns on the specific set of facts that apply to the unique applicant. Every applicant is different. Every applicant has a different social history. Every applicant engaged in misconduct that has different facts involved. There are many subtleties and nuances when you make a determination. So what you're not going to get from these examples, you can't extract a mathematical formula. You can't pull out a matrix that says, if you have an armed robbery, then you need 3.5 years rehabilitation period. It doesn't work like that, because you have to look at the specific facts of the misconduct, which are going to be different in every case. Then you have to look at what the applicant did since then. Everything is different in every case. That's my huge caveat, but let me give you a few quick examples. These are California Supreme Court cases. The first one, 1987. Pacheco is the name of the applicant. In 1974, he counseled a murder witness on how to avoid a subpoena. That's not good. He was a California Highway Patrol officer. also a private investigator in California for some years. And during that time, he engaged in some misconduct, improper collection and storage of evidence, inaccurate record keeping, some suspect loan practices that he got involved in. And importantly, in 1982, he had a previous adverse moral character determination. And during that process, he actually presented some testimony that was not entirely truthful. And then when he was, again, a private investigator, he engaged in some legal but ethically suspect conduct in a family law case. The court described it that way. What rehabilitation did he engage in? Well, he had about a 9-year rehabilitation period. The court said, even if you sort of overlook the 1984 ethically suspect incident, he ends up with about 9 years. He had lots of character letters, including letters from judges and attorneys. The court has said that character references from people in the legal profession weigh more heavily than others, because presumably those people know what it means to practice law ethically. And the court also said in this case, when those witnesses were cross-examined during the moral character hearing, they were confronted with the misconduct that the applicant had engaged in, and they held steadfast to their positive opinions about him. He was a PI in California for 10 years. Part of the time he was a private investigator, 10 years without an allegation of misconduct. That counted as rehabilitation. He put in a lot of pro bono hours, and I mentioned he had a 9-year rehabilitation period. The court found that that was sufficient. He showed sufficient rehabilitation. He was admitted to practice law. I'm going to do one more of my examples to save some time here, and I think it still gives you a pretty good idea. This is a case where the court found that there was insufficient rehabilitation. Mr. Mena, he was an attorney in New Jersey who used funds from his client trust account. That is, he misappropriated client funds to pay gambling debts. He had a gambling addiction. He was suspended from the practice of law in New Jersey as a result, and he thought it would be a good idea to manufacture methamphetamine while he was suspended so that he could pay off his gambling debts. That didn't work out. He ended up getting caught, and he served a 4-year prison sentence, which led to his permanent disbarment in New Jersey. And then during the moral character process, he really presented very little evidence that he sought to reimburse the clients whose money he had misappropriated to pay his debts. So that's the misconduct. The rehabilitation, he did provide evidence that he had stopped gambling. In fact, he even had some expert testimony with respect to the fact that he had addressed successfully his gambling problem. He, like Mr. Pacheco, had lots of character references, 5 of whom were attorneys. He started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings at some point. And he had about a 5.5-year rehabilitation period during which he didn't engage in further misconduct, and he engaged in these other rehabilitative activities. Nevertheless, the court found that that was insufficient. Mr. Mena did not receive a positive moral character determination. That was quick. It was a lot of information. I hope it gave you something in terms of understanding rehabilitation, why it's important, how we assess it, its role in the moral character process. And I am going to stop there. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Lang.
This is Alan in LA. David, that was great. You touched on this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I just want to emphasize that fitness to practice law is completely separate from moral character, and the two should not be confused. We see people who suffer from various mental impairments or whatever, and you would think that they're completely unfit to practice law. That's not within our purview. Is that correct, David? Unless it impacts on violation of law or something like that, that would then implicate moral character.
That's correct. I think that's right, Alan. You know, there's in California, it's the moral character process. In other jurisdictions, they call it character and fitness. And you're absolutely right. This goes to my point about mental health or other medical issues. Our job here, when we do a moral character determination, is not to assess them medically. Like I said, sometimes those issues can become relevant only in the sense that when they're inextricably linked to acts of misconduct, then addressing the underlying problem might bolster a showing of rehabilitation. But broadly speaking, I think you're correct.
Okay, thank you, David.
Thank you all. Now we are really short on time, and I know we are about to lose few individuals, and I certainly don't want to lose the quorum. I've been informed that the next agenda item is item number 5, which is the director's report, but we're going to postpone that agenda item until after the closed session. So unless we have anything further, Audrey, I am going to I would say leave the open session, and then all the committee members will now join the closed session. And upon completing the closed session, the committee will then return back to its open session.
That's right. And I
Please
sent
do so.
everyone the closed session invite, a calendar invite this morning. So just look for that from me, and I'll see you in closed.
Thank you.
I need a nap.
Reina, do we have Judge Mesiwala? Oh, yep, she's here. Okay, I feel like we have the whole crew, minus Esther perhaps, but we'll just let her join us later on. Devin, can you please take the roll?
Dr. Bolton,
LA office, you muted.
Sorry, Dr. Bolton just said yes. So did Brody Chan.
So did Cal. Yeah, we're all here.
Alex Chan,
Save some
Yes.
time.
Kareem Gangora, Larry Kaplan,
Here.
Paul Kramer,
I'll be back in a second.
No, it's too loud. It's too loud.
Oh, no, wait, I do it here. So.
Folks, I'm really sorry. We need to get the roll for the record, especially as we're close to quorum. So if everybody could mute when they're not talking, that'd be great. And Devin, if you have any trouble hearing, just go ahead and go back and get those yays or nays of who's here.
Okay.
Alex Lawrence, Esther Lynn, Justice Mesiwala,
Yes.
Bethany Peak,
Here.
Ashley Silva Guzman, Judge Reina,
Here.
Vince Reyes,
Here.
Alan Yokelson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Devin. Next item on the agenda is 4.1, action on inspection report for the Southern California Institute of Law. Natalie, Leonard, and Paul Kramer, please take it away.
Thanks, Alex. So Southern California Institute of Law is a registered, unaccredited distance law school. Previously, it was an accredited law school. This is its first inspection as an unaccredited distance law school. The team was composed of David Kelly, who has over 30 years of experience volunteering and working with the state bar, specifically related to the bar exam, and now for several years with inspections. Also, Greg Shin, a former program manager here at the State Bar, who has had experience with both standard periodic inspections and also inspections involving non-compliance. So he's seen a range of inspections. And Teresa Selensky and State Bar staff, supported by State Bar staff. The findings of the team's report are attached, as well as the response from the law school. This week, the law school also submitted an additional response, which was posted for your review, I believe, on Wednesday. That most recent response identifies a section that was redacted from their response. That section was redacted at the law school's request. The law school provided us with the version of the response that they asked for us to post to you. After reading the staff report, they provided this additional response, but they elected not to add back the redacted response. So that's just a procedural background. The law school, so looking at the facts, the team does not agree with the school's assessment of the facts in many situations, and the staff recommendation is different than the recommendation of the law school. We highlighted the most salient points in the memo, which are this. The law school has had financial challenges. For the last several years, the law school has posted losses, and the projections for the future for the law school assume that in order to regain solvency, the law school's class will grow by 400%, and the law school has not seen growth like that in the past. The law school has indicated that in November, they expect a $150,000 stock investment. They have not advised how they will use that. Based on that, they would ask for the committee's assessment that the law school is in a position to provide the anticipated programs that it promises to students. But staff notes that the purchase has not yet closed, and the school has not advised how it will use that, whether it's a deposit toward a DIAC application, whether it's paying for past existing losses, or it can be used to fund future materials. The committee would have the option to evaluate in the future to see if this purchase does close and how it impacts the school's plans and financials, and the committee can reevaluate at that point. On a second level, when looking at the school's overall program, one of the factors that is identified is looking at state bar exam pass scores on a time period that the committee specifies. And here, this school has been in operation since 1986. It does offer a very modest way to attend law school. Total tuition for the full JD is under $9,000 for their tuition, about $5,000 for fees. But the flip side of this is that the most recent reported 5-year cumulative pass rate is under 16%. It is one of the 2 lowest scores, and of all of the law schools that are in operation in the unaccredited portfolio. And the third school is approximately 20 points higher in score versus these original 2. So this is a real challenge, though it's a modest investment for the students, and some have licensed and gone on to have careers that they were very happy with as a result. For every 15 who do, 85 do not. And we feel like additional oversight could be helpful. Because the law school, when presented with specific items and ask for specific changes, is responding. Because the law school has suggested that there will be a financial investment, and because after a period of difficult state bar scores, the law school has shown that their first-year law students' exam pass rate has increased, and they project that their bar exam pass rate will increase cumulatively over 5 years from about 15% to about 22% in the next report. What is recommended is, rather than probation, to return to the school in 3 years, to be able to have a more detailed dialogue, to continue to support the school in its very firmly held mission, to provide an affordable education to underserved populations. On the other hand, the law school would ask fervently that, based on their efforts to date and their past reputation, that the committee would consider a 5-year renewal, which would place the next inspection at 2028. The motion that is listed, it represents the staff recommendation, which would be a 3-year renewal and an inspection in 2026. This is the point. Paul, would you have anything to add?
Well, one clarification. We talk about a 3-year renewal, but it's not as if they their registration goes away after that period. That's just the point in time when we revisit them and decide if we want to take any sort of enforcement action, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So it would mean that that's when the next inspection will happen. Yes. Thank you for that clarification. And so at this point, before the committee discussion, we would generally offer a school an optional 5-minute period of public comment. The school let me know that they did not believe that they would be making a public comment. And in fact, one of the deans has a happy family event that's coming up tomorrow, and they have significant preparations for that. So I'm just double checking in the attendee pool, and I don't see any hands raised. And a school is not required to appear or to give any public comment. Are there any questions, or is there any discussion?
I have a question. Has the leadership of this school been consistent over the last decade or so, or has there been changeover in the dean and other administrators as well?
Yes, it's been very consistent. One of the founders, Dean Stan Poulet, has been the dean for the entire time since 1986. And in recent years, since the transition and just before, there's been increasingly active participation from Vice Dean Eric Palmer, who is an attorney in the Santa Barbara area, close to the law school.
Thank you.
And I attended the inspection back in 2019. The school was doing wonderfully at the time. And I remember speaking with Dean Full and also a couple of professors. And I can certainly attest to my conversations with some of the students there. Everyone seemed to enjoy the school very much. And so I certainly remember those fond memories.
And I will say we also received several comments from individuals who did graduate from the school and licensed, and they were extremely positive. We did not receive comments from those that did not graduate or chose to take the bar but were not able to pass, at least as of this moment.
Great. Any other comments from any other community members? Hearing none, my understanding is that we have a motion and resolution on the table. So Natalie, do you mind just putting that up for us?
Sure. I'm going to ask if Cody is able to do so, and if not, I will happily pull it up.
Sure.
Yes, I can do that. Just once. Excuse me.
Perfect.
Just 1 second.
Thank you. And since the inspection, the school has begun to work on a number of the recommendations, and so consistent with the committee's practice, the motion suggests that the school should provide an update as to the completion of each item, and if something is already completed, then they can document continued completion in the report. Though the annual report date is soon, because it's been a little bit more than a year since the inspection, the school does have sufficient time in most cases to complete these recommendations, though of course their state bar exam scores can only change in the instance of additional release of scores.
Natalie, can you remind me who participated in the last inspection? That is, which community member?
There actually was not a committee member available to attend, and so that's why we assigned an additional inspector. So Greg Shin, particularly with State Bar employee experience, and David Kelly, particularly with close experience on the bar exam.
Thank you. Maybe this is another thing we need to talk about the next work planning meeting. I think obviously for those community members who really haven't had a chance to perform any inspection, I think there'll be a good opportunity. And I personally find it very enjoyable just speaking with the deans and students. And so maybe we can talk about how to spread things out just so that we don't have to, use up all the staff resources and use committee member resources to fill in those absences.
It's extremely helpful, and the schools very much appreciate being able to show you their work and to introduce you to their students. So I do appreciate that reminder. Thank you.
So Audrey, if you can just add this to the agenda item for the next work planning meeting, that'd be great. I'll be reminded, and I will make sure to speak to the committee about this. Without further ado, we have agenda item 4.4 up on the screen. Natalie, do you want to read through the resolution for us, just so we know exactly what we're voting on?
Yes. Resolved that the Committee of Bar Examiners receives and adopts the inspection report of Southern California Institute of Law, including all of its recommendations, and receives and files the law school's response. And it is further resolved that the law school submit, as part of its 2024 annual report, documentary evidence of the completion of all recommendations set forth in the report, or, if not fully complete, to explain why they were not completed and provide the timeline and plan for completion of each. And it is further resolved that the law school's registration as an unaccredited distance law school be renewed and its next inspection set for summer 2026.
Is renewed the right term there? That implies that it otherwise expires, which I think we established it really doesn't a few minutes ago.
Historically, we've used the word accredited for the CALs and renewed for the registered schools, so this would be consistent with past practice.
Okay.
Any additional questions or comments on agenda 4.1? If not, I need someone to call for a motion.
This is Robbie. I'll move to adopt the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Robbie.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kramer. Any additional discussions or debates? Hearing none, Devin, please take the roll.
Dr. Bolton,
Yes.
Robert Brody,
Yes.
Dr. Cow,
Yes.
Kareem Gangora, Larry Kaplan,
Yes.
Paul Kramer,
Yes.
Alex Lawrence, Esther Lynn,
Yes.
Justice Misiwala,
Yes.
Bethany Peak,
Yes.
Ashley Silva Guzman, Judge Reyna,
Yes.
Vince Reyes,
Yes.
Alan Yokelson,
Yes.
Alex Chan.
Yes.
With 12 yeses and 0 nos, the motion passes.
Good, Evan. On to agenda item 4.2, which is the discussion Board of Trustees directive to explore requiring law school courses on artificial intelligence and potential state bar rules on the bar exam and artificial intelligence. Cody, Natalie, floor is yours.
Thank you. And during the presentation, we'll also be joined by the chair of CS Bars, Jay Frickberg. He's here in the audience, and so it would be appropriate to promote Dean Frickberg from the University of West Los Angeles.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Would you like me at this time to talk about what CS Bars has already looked into this matter, or?
We're going to give a little bit of background first, just so that everyone has a consistent vocabulary, and then that would be terrific. Thank you.
Great. Natalie, you might have been waiting for me to introduce it, but maybe I'll tee it up and then I'll hand it off to you. I'll try not to bore the committee because I know we've been bringing forward a lot of data and information. I hope this discussion is exciting and interesting because as all of us know, the discussion around AI is very pressing in many spaces. We have been directed by the Board of Trustees to explore various topics. So Natalie's going to talk about one element of the board's directive related to our California accredited law schools, and then I want to address some of our current exam rules and their intersectionality with artificial intelligence tools. And then I want to present to the committee some findings as far as the available tools out there that we just want to make the committee aware of. And we'll explore those tools as well. So with that, Natalie, I'll pass it over to you to kick us off and we can talk about the law school component.
Terrific. Okay, so let's skip past the background slide and begin with the background. Okay, so you may remember that in a past meeting, the Board of Trustees, with the assistance of COPRAC and some consultants who were assisting, created some practical guidance for attorneys in the use of AI. So when doing so, after passing that, it was shared with this committee, and then the Board of Trustees asked the Office of Admissions and the Committee of Bar Examiners to look into requiring courses regarding the competent use of generative AI and to determine whether rules or regulations were needed related to the bar exam and generative AI as well. Next slide. Okay, so when we talk about artificial intelligence, what are we talking about? Generally, two categories. One is generative AI. Examples are large language models, or maybe some of you have used ChatGPT. So it's essentially entering, for example, a prompt and having the product actually create something new that didn't exist before in response to your prompt. There's also machine learning, using sample data to recognize patterns and make predictions, judgments, or decisions. This is also where neural networks would fall, if you have heard that term before. Artificial intelligence is not new. It has actually been around and been developed for many years. And you may have seen that the Nobel Prize was recently awarded to someone for their work decades ago for doing some of the science that was the physical foundation for artificial intelligence. We see this in product recommendations, spam filtering, predictive text when you type an email. We see this everywhere, but it's become more available in a no-code or low-code environment with the introduction of products like ChatGPT or Agentforce, which coordinates with our AIMS applicant portal. We don't use that at that moment. It is a newly launched product in the last month, but that's something we can look at. Next slide. We see many bodies thinking about how to take advantage of the opportunities and also to be concerned about the risks of of Artificial Intelligence. We have the White House blueprint for AI Bill of Rights. The EU, not surprisingly, acted very quickly, being a real area of geography, very concerned about privacy, also acted very quickly in the area of AI. Governor Newsom recently signed an executive order about generative AI applying to all of California. And there are also several different bills that are being considered in the California legislature that we may see in the future session. So considering this is very timely and right in line with other regulators and government bodies. This is a little bit about the COPRAC practical guidance that was issued for the purpose of attorney practice. So there were several considerations that, of course, there are many wide-ranging applications for AI in the practice of law and the administrative functions that are part of the practice of law. But of course, using it must be done in a way that comports with professional responsibility, and therefore lawyers have the affirmative responsibility to understand the risks and benefits. So the existing rule related to attorney practice is Rule 1.1, the duty to keep abreast of the changes in law and its practice, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. And for the attorneys here in the group, you know that there is a new MCLE requirement that will be launching, requiring that 1 hour of the MCLE be in the area of law technology. We think that many people will choose an MCLE in the area of AI. The practical guidance asks attorneys to think about the duty of confidentiality, a duty of competence and diligence, of course, a duty to comply with the law, and very importantly, to note to supervise lawyers and non-lawyers that are using the AI products, to communicate, to charge for work and AI costs in a manner that comports with professional responsibilities, and to prohibit discrimination, harassment, and retaliation, so to avoid toxic elements in AI models. As far as the recommendations to the board from the COPRAC project, they encourage development of attorney education, addressing generative AI, exploring regulatory changes to protect the public, and considering the impact of generative AI on law students and bar applicants. And that's where you come in. Next slide. So as part of this, we tasked the CS bars to discuss what was going on at the moment in the area of AI in schools, and we also convened a group to discuss as well. Let's go to the next slide. Why does AI education matter? It's very important for attorneys, and we think these days law students, to understand the risks of using AI tools, understand that these tools are already in use, understand the needs of future clients that they will be serving when current students exit law school, and to be aware of foundational questions that must be a part of the conversation. Attorney-client privilege, unauthorized practice of law, asking a ChatGPT prompt to do a law function when someone is not a lawyer, for example, compliance and bias. Next slide. The ABA has a task force for law and AI. It's been going on for a little while. Recently, they published some of their findings, talking about AI literacy from legal writing to clinical practice, and determine that familiarity with AI is essential for future professionals. So this is an extension of some of the work that the committee has noticed in the past. For some time now, you have required a formal ability to have some required practical training of law students and additional options for them to go deeper if they wish. And this is an evolution in tech environment. Looking at all schools nationally, 55% of those schools responding to an ABA survey said that right now and 83% of those respondents said they provide other curricular opportunities to students as well. These include legal writing, trial advocacy, litigation drafting, and professional responsibility. Of course, there are differences in resources and missions of ABA schools compared to CALS and also registered schools, but there are commonalities as well. Next slide. So to start to think about this and bring some data for the committee to consider, we've done a couple of things. The first thing we did is in November 2023, held a law school assembly. We brought several individuals to this program. We brought a professor from Vanderbilt who created an AI student in his class to be able to show students how that student would perform, showing both the benefits and the risks of AI. In case you're curious, it was a computer science class. The AI student did very well in the early part of the class, but as things got more complex, it was difficult for the AI student to keep up. We also brought a professor from Berkeley Law, who was the first author of a policy in law schools related to AI. And people were able to talk to him directly. And we talked about what's going on in California law schools in particular. Overall, people talked about wanting to prepare students for a world in which AI is prevalent, almost ubiquitous, submitting confidential information and tools, how to handle copyright and IP, how it's going to affect the labor market for attorneys and legal assistants, and also how it'll affect the practice itself, analysis, summaries, first drafts, and beyond. And should AI be used for something beyond a first draft? Certainly at this point, not. Thinking about the importance of your own professional judgment as an attorney and whether or not it's important to communicate when you have used AI to your clients. In August 2024, we brought some of these findings and had a discussion at the Law School Council, which is composed of ABA administrators. Mostly we heard from them that they have almost universally incorporated AI into the legal writing and research class offered in the first year. Several have AI in the law classes, and they also have optional AI training opportunities as well. In August 2024, we also brought this question to the CS bars. We learned that several schools already have AI courses as well, and we've asked if Chair Frickberg could summarize the discussion directly for everyone here today. So thank you, Chair Frickberg, for taking this time.
Thank you. And again, good afternoon to everyone. I know it's been a long day.
Would you like us to take the slide down so we can converse with you? Terrific, thanks.
Absolutely. So in August, the CS bars discussed this matter. I think just as a way of background, I don't think this is a revolutionary area. I think it's more evolutionary. And it's very similar in pattern if we look back to computer-assisted legal research. When we think of Lexis or now LexisNexis and Westlaw, they first started on the scene in the 70s, really didn't come to the mainstream probably till the 80s and 90s. And now I don't know any lawyer that's going to do research without at least consulting online computer-assisted research. I think the same pattern is happening now with AI. It's just AI is much newer. In comparison, OpenAI, which I think most are familiar with, that's ChatGPT 4.0, the latest incarnation. That entity is only about 9 years old. And we already have some programs in our legal world. We've already seen versions from Westlaw, AI-assisted research. We also have Lexis Protege, AI-assisted research, and of course, CoCounsel, probably being the leader in that area. And the oldest there is only a year and a half. So you can't get much newer than what we're seeing currently. Within the discussion, several of the deans reported that they have already incorporated AI within the curriculum, primarily within legal research and writing or within ethics courses, professional responsibility, I think being the biggest landmine that most lawyers aren't as aware of as they're putting into the public domain, potentially private client information. Secondly, some also mentioned that they have AI courses as electives already. So that's been instituted, but definitely within legal research and ethics separately. We had a further conversation as it related to generative AI use and examination creation, examination grading. The resounding sound on that area was no, not yet, way too soon. We've done internal experiments at my school where generative text was not a good use for grading. We attempted to have a AI program, ChatGPT 4 at that time, give an answer to some essays and have professors grade them. They were all failing answers universally. So we haven't been as concerned about that. We're more concerned about students using AI and not citing it properly. or putting in private confidential information once they go into practice. That was the main area of concern. And it was a short discussion, but I think a very good one. I can answer any questions if that is helpful. Not hearing any. Thank you, as always.
Now, Natalie, I think you might be speaking, but also perhaps muted.
Oh, it's true. I was going to invite Dean Frickberg to stay with us for the remainder of the presentation to the extent that you wish to participate or other questions might be directed to you.
Oh, of course. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going back to the area of thinking about law schools in particular. And so thinking about the purposes for accreditation, these are identified with the help of CS bars as consumer protection and transparency, student success, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and preparation for licensure and professionalism. So these already are a framework in which this can easily be incorporated. Next slide. We think that the rules that might be most applicable that already exist are 4.160D under preparation for licensure and professionalism. Law school shall prepare JD students to become licensed attorneys and practice law in an ethical and professional manner, and to do so in part by including practice-based skills and competencies. So the pluses and minuses of use of generative AI seems to fit squarely within this rule. And also schools have a fair amount of latitude, which they are exercising in a very proactive manner, as we heard from Dean Frickberg. Under 4.160D4, while there's not a prescribed program of legal education, they are required to provide an effective program that includes, but is not limited to, learning experiences that support the acculturation of program graduates to the mores and values of the legal profession, including service, preparation, responsiveness, confidentiality, excellence, civility, professionalism, and ethics, and knowledge of the process and skills for legal research and writing. And I think that this is a really effective way to set a standard for the schools because it doesn't identify any specific technology or any specific use. It essentially asks the schools to continue to affirmatively evolve in the same manner that legal education and legal practice is evolving. And we see that that is already happening even in the absence of any specific directive from the State Bar. Next slide. So we'd like to pose a few introductory ideas for you to think about. So much as we did with the item related to handwriters, and what would the committee like to do in the future, we'd like to give a few possible thoughts. One is to decide that the framework is sufficient right now and take no action at this time because the space is rapidly evolving. Law schools are actively experimenting, and it may be prudent to wait for new regulations and see what the toughest questions might be. A second possibility is to create a guidance document, much like the practical guidance from CoPrac, for law schools choosing to offer courses in AI or to incorporate AI in their current courses, like their research courses. This could give flexibility, but at the same time, identify specific opportunities and support continued integration of generative AI understanding. And it could encourage course topics around core competencies and build the foundation to keep meeting professional responsibility as this area evolves. The most prescriptive option would be to add specific guidelines for accredited law school rules, most likely under the practice-based skills area, or under the legal research and writing area. While that would give very clear guidance, it might be very static in an area that is very dynamic. So I wonder if there are any questions about these possible options or if there's initial interest in one more than another. And since we have the benefit of Dean Frickberg here, though I wouldn't ask him to speak for all of CS bars because this question was not posed to the body in general, it'd be helpful, I think, for the committee to know your opinion.
Absolutely. And again, speaking only for myself, not for the accredited law schools or the CS bars separately. My thought would be option one or option two. I'm kind of on the fence. I think option one is probably the most intellectually honest. It is evolving so quickly, only a year and a half, really in this space for the practice of law. But as a bureaucrat, and sadly, I think of myself that way now in administration, I think option two would make me feel more comfortable because it would give me guardrails. What are some guidelines? Option three, I think, is too much in the future. I don't think we really know what those requirements would be. As one of the examples I thought was quite interesting, when I met with co-counsel, one of the vendors in this space, they were looking to use an app on a phone, in theory, that would record and transcribe information live in a courtroom, and then would flag when it's time to object, and for you to stand and object. And you can only think of all the ethical rules being involved in that, recording the classroom, much less a courtroom in comparison. So I don't think we've really conceptualized all the ways they might use AI in the future. So again, my thought, option one or option two.
Thanks. It's helpful to have that perspective. Cody, is there anything you'd like to add about these options?
No, I think that feedback is super helpful. Before we move to any of the exam related discussion, I am curious if any members of the committee have their own thoughts or questions about these options.
Yeah, I would say that before you engage to use a tool that basically is doing a lot of your work for you, you should have engaged in, doing it self. Part of learning is to do it. And so I wouldn't want to see AI sort of take the place of doing the hard work of reading the cases and, trying to understand them and all the other things that go into an education. It may be useful down the road, helping lawyers quickly draft, wills and trusts and other documents and refine that, fine. But when you're talking about law schools, you're talking about, starting from the ground to learn to be a lawyer. And I don't know that we want to encourage the use of tools like this to speed that up. It's kind of why we don't want people to go through law school too quickly, to cram everything all into a very short period of time, because you have to develop and that takes some time.
Paul, maybe I can share a quick personal anecdote on that point. Just a few weeks ago, I had the privilege of attending an event at UC Berkeley related to artificial intelligence in the legal field. There were a lot of law firms there. One of the examples that was shared as far as how this is being introduced in practice was the junior attorneys would perhaps use an AI tool to develop an initial draft in a work product, and then their supervisors would sit down and go through it piece by piece and discuss either areas it worked, areas it didn't work. And what I found interesting about that is that they said that actually takes more time. It takes more time than the standard approach, but they felt like it was the right way to both introduce these technologies, but also allow the junior attorneys an opportunity to actually get their hands on the work and go through it very detailed. So I think the concern that you're sharing is exactly the kind of concern that people who are introducing these tools in a responsible manner are thinking about, and they're kind of introducing these different workflows to make sure that newly licensed attorneys don't skip that step. That's a really important part of their learning process. So I just want to share that to note that I think you're thinking about this the right way.
In one of the school courses that's focused on AI, what they do is when they're looking at cases, they have an AI model brief the case. And then the assignment for the students is actually to identify the strong points and the deficiencies of the AI briefing, and then to write their own briefing. So they begin to understand the pros and cons. Not all of their cases are done that way, but that's part of an AI module. And at this point in the level of learning, they don't need to seed the deficiencies. there are positive elements, but also concerns.
I was just
Rena?
Oh, yeah, thank you. I was just going to say, I appreciate this discussion, Mr. Frickberg's, your comments as well. As a judge, I've seen some AI in the courtroom that's not been so good in briefs. Even the example you talk about of a recording device, we're not allowed recording devices unless the court approves it. No, I appreciate the discussion. I also agree, option 1 and option 2 would be something to explore, and I think it's a good thing. Appreciate your presentation.
Thanks, Jadrina.
Oh, and I would also say, as applied to accredited schools, our kind of modus operandi is to give them more leeway in the design of their curriculum, because they've proven to us that they're doing it well by virtue of achieving the NPR. Graduating a lot of students who pass the bar exam, whereas with registered schools, we're a little bit more prescriptive, because they haven't necessarily risen to the level of accredited schools. And that's a very broad generalization, and many people are angrily pounding their keyboards right now, but send those to Mr. Brody.
Thanks, Paul. Well, I think at this point we're ready to turn over to AI in the area of the bar exam. So I'll turn it over to Cody.
Thank you, Natalie. So yes, as we mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, the board's directive included both exploring this requirement at law schools and also exploring the intersection of our existing exam rules and policies and generative AI. So I want to go through this real quickly. I think we can touch on it pretty briefly. But we went and we reviewed our existing exam rules. And I mean, the good news is that our existing rules are broad enough to cover the risks associated with artificial intelligence. So if you look at Rule 4.70B, prohibits actions that compromise exam security or administration. You can see how submitting information about an exam question into an AI prompt is obviously an exam security problem. Looking at the guidelines, we see that guideline 4.70 related to conduct at examinations sufficiently addresses this risk. So we have areas related to violating the exam rules, policies, and procedures. We have C4, conduct that results in a violation of security and examination. And we have E4, evidence of suspected cheating on the examination. Also looking at our Chapter 6 decision matrix, the document that we use to determine sanctions for possible violations, we see several listed under the suspected cheating category, and I think it's clear how using generative AI to either generate an entire response or as like a search function fits well under the concept of suspected cheating. Now, that doesn't mean that the rules are perfect, and so I think there are some opportunities for possible next steps to enhance the rules. So for example, we could add specificity, to the rules and guidelines, specifically around not just AI, but the use of technology more broadly. For example, we currently have our Chapter 6 rules that are under consideration, proposed revisions, and we can look at the language that's being proposed and perhaps be thoughtful and mindful to include more specific references to technology and artificial intelligence. We can also expand the rules to address some concerns that the rules actually aren't very clear about right now. So our existing rules are very focused on addressing cheating, but they don't necessarily address the risks related to exposure of exam materials. And again, you can clearly see how submitting exam material information into a prompt that ultimately goes to an AI model and is trained. And at that point is essentially open perhaps to the public, is an issue related to exam material exposure and exam security. So one thought would be to look at our rules and maybe beef up areas where we can be clearer about behavior related to exam material exposure, a focus on that as opposed to just a focus on cheating. Also, we are, it was mentioned several times today, reviewing our exam instructions and policies in preparation for February 2025. I think now is a great time for our staff to be mindful to update some of the language in our policies, again, reflecting that the intersection of technology and AI. And so we have, I think, a lot of mentions to prohibitive items and kind of like physical risks, but perhaps we need to address the digital component as well. And I think we've started to touch on this just thinking about how early this space, how early or how much this space is evolving. But I think it's worth noting that the committee and staff should be prepared to revisit rules if novel issues arise over the next upcoming administrations. So I guess I would summarize by saying it appears from our vantage point that the rules are sufficient as they are. That shouldn't mean that we don't take an opportunity in our current rule revision process and our policies process, revision process to enhance and modernize some of that language.
Cody, so does our definition of cheating simply rely on the word cheat and then a common understanding that using AI to help one prepare a response to a test would be cheating, or should we be more explicit?
I think the way you just described it is accurate. And then, you know, being more explicit, I think would be our first possible next step here, which would be just adding specificity about the ways that cheating can be conducted. You know, I think we could never produce an exhaustive list, but knowing that technology and AI just poses unique risks, it might be worth noting those explicitly in some way.
Yeah, and as we change the bar exam to actually require or test on the quality of one's writing and grammar, we'll need to protect against, you know, grammar reviewing software helping one do that. I personally think that's going to be that's one of the places where younger generations, it's my observation, have their writing skills have deteriorated over time. And so I'm actually kind of bemused that we would think that it would be a good idea to test those skills. But if we're going to do it, we need to protect against them bolstering their skills artificially.
Great.
Well, let me, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Cody.
No, I was going to just pivot to one last quick section, but if there were comments or questions before I proceed, I'm happy to take them.
Oh, one more thought to think about. It may be that AI would provide some help in the realm of grading. I don't know if that's on your list at all, but it might be worth thinking about.
Well, I was just about to go there. So if there's no other questions about the rules, I can quickly just touch on some opportunities.
Please.
Okay. Well, this next section, I want to be clear about something first. I know that artificial intelligence and these AI discussions are very sensitive. And I want to note, we have not adopted any tools for our exam purposes as it stands, but in our exploration and events we've attended and other interactions with vendors throughout our bar exam changes process, we have been introduced to some new tools and I think some opportunities that are worth noting. So we want to share them with you here. I want to quickly, very surface level, kind of introduce what these tools can do. This is by no means meant to be an exhaustive discussion about this topic, nor is it an indication that they're in use right now, but I want to share it and I guess, capture some feedback on these opportunities. So let's move forward. So I put this kind of, I don't know, sharp statement on this slide because this came up at the UC Berkeley's AI Institute, and I thought it was a really profound statement. This is from a roboticist, a famous roboticist, and it says that what's easy for robots is hard for humans, and what's easy for humans is hard for robots. And what that means in this context is there are traits related to artificial intelligence and machine learning that are better than human operators. And so as we talk about opportunities for AI, the purpose is not to remove humans from the process, but to fill in the gaps where there might be opportunities for improvement. So you could think about where a human struggles. Consistency, objectivity, pattern identification. Even though we all believe that we are very good at these things and we can try our best, it's just not an inherent strength of humans. I mean, you can even think about an individual who just stayed up too late and because of their state isn't being as objective as they could be. But these tools don't suffer from those faults. So I want to start there that the discussion is really about enhancement, not about replacement. So we've seen some tools that are already out there in the market that can produce first drafts for exam questions. We've seen other tools that can do initial grading for essay responses. We've seen other tools that are really designed for cheating and plagiarism detection. And there's even been some tools, I added this to yesterday, that are related to simulation and practical skills assessment. And I added this to the slide yesterday because as part of the court's order related to the future bar exam, there was an element related to assessing practical skills in a more simulation environment and perhaps exploring the use of artificial intelligence to make that more feasible. That some of that's already started, and there are some tools already focused around that type of assessment. I wanted to share a few diagrams that describe how these tools would work in these settings because, again, I want to really be clear that we are not talking about removing humans from these processes. So there is a principle within the artificial intelligence space called human in the loop. And the purpose is that, again, an artificial intelligence tool enhances the process, but a human is always involved in the process, whether that's for security purposes, whether it's for improving the outcomes. There's a variety of reasons why a human should play a role. So in the exam development space, the way that this would work is you would take historic question information, you would submit it into a secure tool. That tool would develop questions that look similar to questions that were produced or that were used in the past. But that's not where it ends. Then a human plays a role in selecting the options that are either good or bad. And that information then goes back to the tool, and the tool gets better and better over time. And so nothing is ever accepted as being good enough just because it came out of the tool. A human plays a role in confirming, refining, and improving the process throughout. And similarly, that can be the same in a human in the loop tool for grading. So you can have a tool in which question and answer data goes into a secure tool. The tool can look at patterns in written responses and identify the requirements for a good response. It can predict a score, and if that prediction is highly certain because of certain patterns, you may accept that score. But you can always have a system in which a human reviews and corrects that initial recommendation from the tool. And so in that sense, we are talking about a productivity improvement, but again, not a final determination or decision process. So there's always a human making final determinations in instances where it is necessary. So I just am quickly going over it because I'm trying to be mindful of time. I want to also note that there are real concerns that we should be considering about risk and trustworthiness of these tools. I won't go into all of these today just because this has been a long presentation, but what you're seeing in the screen right now are recommendations from the National Standards National Institute of Standards and Technology framework. And there are other frameworks for us to consider if we were to ever consider using these tools that can help us assess whether they are safe, whether they provide enough transparency, whether they mitigate the risks of bias and so forth. So that was a quick, I just wanted to go quickly through that because it is getting late in the day. Happy to take any questions. I think our message to the committee is that we are observing the space. We are seeing some tools that are being introduced, and we will likely explore them more just to get a sense of how effective they are. But we want the committee to be aware of what's happening in the space as well.
Thank you, Cody. Now, I know, the court has given us directive based on the court's order yesterday, and I want to assume, Audrey, the State Bar will explore various ways to comply. I don't know if we would have any, concrete plans in place by the next meeting, or maybe in the future, but I'm sure this is something that the committee will certainly want to be involved in and participate and contribute as much as we can. Any additional questions or discussions? Hearing none, this is our last agenda item for the open session. Am I correct, Audrey?
Cody has a few slides that he was going to share on jointly accredited, couple updates.
Oh, okay. Yeah, please take it away, Cody.
I'll go quickly. I've taken a lot of time for today's meeting.
Item 5, I think, and then that's the end.
Okay.
And let me get those slides up here. Okay. Okay. Well, I have just a few quick updates to share, so this should not take long, and I will go quickly through them. We wanted to give an update on the jointly accredited status application. I think we brought to the committee in June an update that we were going to be launching the application at the end of July, which we successfully did. We also at that time, I think, signaled that we were going to introduce a digital application process, which I think was the first time that we had digitized entirely an accreditation or registration related document. And I guess I'm here to report that it appears to have been a success. It's allowed us to gather a large amount of documentation, signatures, and other elements in a space that is well organized and really well documented. So we're going to be looking for opportunities to adopt digital applications elsewhere in our law school regulation work. We've included as an attachment to this director's report a copy of the application and a unique self-study that we developed particularly for the inspection process related to jointly accredited applications. So I would point the committee's attention to those PDFs if they would like to look at what is expected of a law school that's seeking jointly accredited status. We've only received about 2 complete applications and 1 complete self-study at this point. I think we suspect that because there is an inspection component to the application that some schools are awaiting their periodic inspection to apply. So perhaps as we schedule inspections, we'll see more of those applications. But we have at least 1, and we are working to schedule that first inspection as part of the jointly accredited status. And this will be really our first kind of stress test of this application process. And we'll be able to report back to the committee how effective that is. Another quick update, annual reports for our accredited and registered law schools went out on September 20th as normal. It includes instructions, our disclosure forms, report templates, and a spreadsheet where we gather a lot of our enrollment data. Those annual reports are due on November 15th. So we'll anticipate a trove of new data at that point. And I just want to note that we updated the instructions this year based on feedback that we received from the law schools. Notably, we clarified the instructions related to total enrollment. That was informed again by the feedback and possible confusion that law schools shared with us. And it's also needed for our new accreditation services fee, which is based on a per student amount. So that's just one update, but we made some other updates to the annual report to make it as clear as possible and easier for law schools to fill out. I wanted to share also a unique number. We talked a little bit today about the application for the bar exam launching. At the point of this presentation going up, we had 617 applications for the February bar exam. That was at exactly 1 week of the window opening. Looking at previous years, this is a slower initial turnout for applications. And if you use that number to forecast total applications, we'd be at 3,250. None of our forecasts anticipate that low of a number. So I think the message here is that some applicants are still awaiting final determinations from the Supreme Court regarding February before they submit their application. So I think we'll continue to monitor kind of the energy around applications and see how that shifts once a final determination is made. And lastly, we've been bringing to the committee kind of at a ad hoc basis updates on other admissions programs. We are working internally to develop a more consistent dashboard or some other tool the committee can use. So we'll stay tuned for that. But for now, I wanted to provide these updates on our various programs related to registered in-house counsel, foreign legal consultants, our PLP program, and registered legal aid and registered military spouse attorneys. We also recently appointed our new CS Bars members and law school counsel appointments. I apologize, I do not have the entire list in front of me, but we just heard from CS Bars Chair Dean Frickberg. So we'll have new and fresh perspectives for some of our important work, like the Unaccredited Law School Rules Review. We're looking forward to working with those individuals. And then, of course, our next committee meeting is December 6th. Thank you.
Just a little bit of an update. The group decided to hold that meeting the following week, the following Wednesday, December 10. Makes it a little bit easier for those coming back from Thanksgiving, and we can get full participation.
CS Bars it is, right?
CS Bars.
Yep, great.
There will also be an additional CS Bars meeting this month on October 29th to continue the rules revision process. They commented on about the first half of the proposal that you saw back in August. There was excellent engagement, a lot of very interesting suggestions, and they got halfway through the list. So it'll be completed on the 29th. And thanks to Paul Kramer and Dean Frickberg who are here, as well as Dr. Bolton, who were part of that effort.
Thanks all. Audrey, is that it? All the agenda items?
That's it.
Okay. Well, thank you again for all the community members who are still here. It's been a long day, but I'm sure I'm glad we were able to get through all the items. So unless there's anything else, this concludes our open session, and I will now adjourn the meeting. Thank you. See you all in December.